Hello and welcome to the very first YouTube production masterclass. My name is Marco and I am a YouTube partner manager for the UK and Ireland. And today we're live streaming from the YouTube space here in London. So this is a very first session of a series of production masterclasses that will go live every Thursday from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. if you're watching from GMT time zone, and from 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. if you're watching from Central European time zone. So what we'll be covering during these 4 weeks are a series of tips and advice from a master of photography. She's a director of photography, and she will be with us for pretty much 4 weeks, covering all the principles on production, lighting, how to set up lightings on the set, and production on a shoestring. And so basically today we'll start the very first session with some principle on camera and sounds. So pretty much how to basically cover all the camera basics and sound recording. Next week on Thursday again we'll be talking about lighting for beginners, so how to light your set and your subjects. And the following week we'll be covering cinematography, which is a way more advanced section on shooting beautiful looking film. And the final session will be production on a shoestring. That's because you don't need a lot of money to create beautiful films. So with that we'll discuss on how to create studio quality films on a very tight budget. So every live session will last approximately 1 hour, but of course, this being YouTube, you'll also be able to find the recording of each section on the YouTube Creator Academy channel, so you can go back and rewatch, and make sure you subscribe to the channel as well, so you can keep up. If you registered for one of these masterclasses and you submit your questions at the time of registration, we'll be covering those questions today and in the following sessions. But don't worry, if you didn't submit your questions, you can still post underneath, in the comment box below. You can still ask your questions, and Michelle, which I'm soon going to introduce, will be covering and answering those questions right after the live stream. Very importantly, we would like to encourage you guys to possibly follow all of the 4 sessions. So watch them all, and to improve your skills, and also to get better and get the most out of these 4 masterclasses. But also at the end of the 4th session, you will receive a test with 4 questions, and if you answer correctly, what happens is that you will receive a letter of completion from YouTube, which is a good thing to have. So we're going to certify that you guys completed the course, the online course. And after that, you also may be selected to receive a personal consultation with one of our experts from the YouTube team. And so basically you guys can look at your channel and get a personal advice on how to improve the quality of your channel and videos. Well, now I guess without further ado, I can finally introduce Michelle, who is director of photography and will be here with us for today and the next 3 weeks. So welcome. Thank you for being with us.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Tell us something about yourself.
Yeah, I will. Okay, so I am Michelle. I'm a director of photography and a camera operator as well. I graduated from London Metropolitan Broadcast degree program with first class honours, not to brag, but it was not too bad. These days I mostly shoot broadcast, so I recently finished completing filming on a new BBC series, The Heart of Turkey, this summer in Istanbul. I've also shot children's programming for Channel 5, but I really like to shoot online videos too, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to share some of my knowledge with you guys.
That's a great CV you have.
Well, thank you very much.
So tell us something about technical camera and sound. So that's the topic of today's sessions.
Yeah, so basically we're going to start really with the brass tacks of camera production and also sound. Sound we'll probably get to a bit later on in this session, but I'm going to start by just talking through your essentials of setting up your camera, framing your shot and shooting with the right technical specifications to get a great looking shot every time. We are going to be looking at DSLRs. I've also got a GoPro. We'll talk about some handheld cameras and different options. We're actually going to be shooting on the Canon C300 range of cameras, but essentially what we're going to be looking at, things like your aperture buttons, shutter speed, they're the same on most cameras. I know some of you will be shooting on Nikon DSLRs, very similar to the Canons, slightly different lenses. They've also got different color there, but the principles are essentially the same. I would kind of quite like to get straight into it, Marco.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
if you wish, you can accompany me and we'll have a little look. We've got a demo area set up. So let's go.
Let's go.
I'm going to take this with me. Can you bring these gels and clips?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So we're going to be first looking at things like depth of field, which is basically your plane of vision. So I'm going to be switching on these lights and lighting up our subject, and then we'll be playing around with the camera technical specifications to give you just a slightly different image quality. So I will start with switching these on. Now they might be a bit bright, so don't look directly at the lights. Okay, lovely. All right, so if we take a look at this image here, I set it up earlier to roughly give you an idea of what a nice composition should be like. We're going to be running through the different aspects that you can see on this screen. We've got numbers like f2.2, that's basically your aperture. The F stands for f-stop or focal stop. We'll be talking a bit about that. You can see ISO there, which on this camera says 800. That is basically an exposure element. We'll be talking a little bit about that. You've got a K, which indicates your white balance. On this camera, I've dialed it in manually to about 3600 Kelvin. Now that's roughly tungsten. We'll be talking a little bit about that as well. And then probably the last thing I'll talk about in this session is shutter speed, which on this camera, I've got set to 1/50th. So let's start with that. I'm going to just pop this down. Okay, when you're framing up your shot, probably the first thing that you're going to be looking at is how bright, how well exposed your image is. You really don't want to have anything that looks blown out is the term that we use. So essentially anything where you've got areas of the skin that look very light. If it starts to go really white, then that's sort of non-recoverable in the edit. That's what we call overexposed. Now, exposure is controlled on any camera via, well, on any manual camera via 3 essential methods. The first one we're going to look at is your f-stop. So if I just dial this, you can see the image should get darker. Now, what that does is controls your aperture. Now, the best way to think about aperture is if you approach it like an eye. So a wide aperture is going to let a lot of light into your image, and that's basically what we do when we open that up down to 2, 3, something like that. If you're closing that down, if you're closing that down, you're going to end up with a much darker image. You're going to let a lot less light in, and as a result of that, you're going to end up with a very flat looking image. So one thing that you want to do to keep your image looking very cinematic is to try and have quite an open f-stop. So I've got this set to about f2.2. Now, if you want to be able to use that quite wide open aperture, you need to stop other light coming into the camera. Now, we've got lights in the studio that I can control, but if you don't have those options, there are in-camera controls that you can use to change that. So the first one I want to talk about is ISO. That's just, I've highlighted that on this camera. It's on your DSLRs, it's going to have a button, it's going to say ISO. You'll be able to scroll that in, and I'll show you that here. It's just going to be on this camera. You've got just an ISO button there. That's going to allow you to press that, just scroll in. Normally it's going to be in increments of about a 60th, so 120, something like that is going to be a good sort of ISO. On this, we've got it set to about 800 now. I'm going to show you what it does if I change the ISO and how that affects the image. So, just going to highlight that, and then I'm going to just change that down. So as you can see, ISO, because it adds exposure, it changes the darkness or the lightness of the image. Now on this camera, I set it to 800 because that's the native ISO. And what that means is this camera is designed to work really well at 800 ISO. If you're increasing the ISO on your camera, you can end up getting digital grain, which ends up making your image look noisy. It kind of has a pixel pattern when you look at it in post. So you really want to keep your ISO fairly low, and in this situation where I want to have a nice wide open aperture, the lower your ISO, the more you're going to be able to do that. So let's change that and see what happens. So if we set that to about 400, if you have a look at the exposure meter, which is just that white strip along the bottom of the monitor, it's just about above the middle, which is telling me that it's a pretty good exposure. You want to keep that roughly in the middle. Slightly higher is fine, slightly lower, and you're going to have to add gain in post, which is going to increase your noise. It's going to degrade the quality of your image. So we've looked at your f-stop, we've looked at your ISO. Now the third way that you can change the light coming into this picture is with your shutter speed. I'm going to just highlight that there. So as you can see on that, it's highlighted in orange, it's at 1/50th. Now traditionally, shutter speed is going to be twice what your frame rate is. These cameras were actually shooting at 50 interlaced, but in the UK region at least, PAL, you're going to be shooting at about 25 frames for a standard image. If you do want to shoot slow motion, for example, you're going to shoot higher shutter speed, higher frame rate, and that means that you can halve that in post and you'll have your image stretched out by 2 times. So that's, you know, something that we'll get onto when we talk more about tips and tricks. But for now, I'm going to try and demonstrate a little bit of what shutter speed does. It might be a bit difficult because these are on tripods. But yeah, essentially, with your shutter speed, you can... that would be helpful if I highlighted that. You can basically increase that up to almost a limitless number, and it's going to, again, take more pictures quicker. If you think about shutter speed as relating to photography, which is essentially where all cinematography comes from, the faster your shutter speed, the more pictures you're taking in a second. So film is kind of a trick anyway. It's a series of individual frames that the mind sees so quickly that you process it as just a motion picture. But that's where the element of photography comes in. It is pictures combined together to create motion. The higher your shutter speed is, the more motion you've got. And it's helpful for certain applications. If you're filming something like sports, you probably want to have a slightly higher shutter speed. You're going to basically freeze your action. So if you've got a footballer running across the screen, generally you're going to be shooting that slightly higher shutter speed. For our use, we've got our model here just sat. We're going to stick on about 50th. It's going to look sort of a nice, fairly well lit, good image. Lower shutter speeds let more light come in. The longer you've got your frame open, you're going to let more light in. But again, you start to get motion blur. So if I was selecting a lower shutter speed, I don't think you can at 50i, but if I took that down to, say, for example, a 30th on the DSLR, and then I panned, you're going to see a slight motion blur with our model. And it's a good effect if you want it. For something like this, a standard application for vlogging, you don't really want that. You want just a nice, clean, defined image. You want some sharpness in there, and you want everything to be well exposed. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about this lens. I've got on here a 50mm, which some people call the nifty 50, basically because it can do anything. On these cameras, it's really good for this kind of mid-shot. It's a prime lens, which means that it's a fixed focal distance. So if you talk about that in terms of zoom lenses, can you just pick me up a lens from the table, Marco? Thank you. So just there's a zoom lens on there, and I'll just demonstrate the difference between those. Yeah, so basically with a prime lens, thank you very much,
Cheers.
You've got less glass, you've got a cleaner image, you can open your f-stop wider, you can let more light in. However, you are limited in your framing options. You can't move quickly because I've got absolutely no zoom here. If I do that, I'm just losing focus. It's the only ring that's on a prime lens is a focus ring. So they're really great for cinematic looking visuals. If you've got control over your shoot environment, if you've not got a subject that's going to be moving a lot that you need to track, a prime lens is excellent. If you've got somebody moving around like me in this session, you're going to want something like a zoom. Now this one is a 24-105. Basically, numbers on the lenses, the lower the number, it means the wider the lens, so the more of an image you're going to see. The 105 here is really quite a punched-in lens. I'll show you what that does if we sit onto this. Well, I probably won't actually because it's recording, but I'll show you it on this camera. So, Marco, if I just pass you that body cap.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. So with a zoom lens, you've got more elements inside of the glass. It's basically, you can think of it as being several lenses compressed into one. Because of that, you can't open it up to the same kind of bright f-stop that you can with a prime lens. But what you can do is change your focal length. So I'll just demonstrate that here. So you've got on the 24 end, quite a nice wide image, but you can also go really close on a zoom lens. But as you can see with this one, you can not open any more than f4. That's going to be, you know, a fairly dark image if you don't add ISO. As you can see here, I've like racked the ISO up to 800. I wouldn't normally do that for this kind of camera. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit more about depth of field. I did touch on it just at the start of this session. It's the main thing that separates out your image from looking flat and looking kind of like just a CCTV style image and from looking like a cinematic image. Now I do actually have in this sequence some kind of lamp in the background. You can't really see it. I'm just going to shift it across. But if you're setting up for your vlog, if you've got something like you're in front of your desk or you have a computer in the background, you're going to want to see a difference in plane and it's going to make your image look more cinematic. So as you can see on this screen, what I've done is sharpened up our main actor and then the background is defocused. I've done that by having a fairly low f-stop. It's going to let in a lot of light and it's going to keep your depth of field fairly shallow. As you can see, I can pull focus, go over to the lamp. It's quite a narrow depth of field there. You're going to have to be quite careful with making sure your image is sharp before you start shooting. On this camera there is a zoom button, so you can check that. There will be as well on your DSLRs. It might not be able to zoom while you're shooting like this one though. So if you've got a nice cinematic image, it's just going to add a little bit more production quality. And like I said, the main way to do that is by having your f-stop nice and wide. Now, if you have too much light coming into the camera and you do have to stop down, there are ways that you can do that without adjusting your f-stop. On this camera, we've got built-in ND filters. So as you can see, I can flip that one on. It's immediately cut out the light. Now ND means neutral density and it basically stops additional light coming into your camera and it allows you to keep that f-stop nice and wide. I mean, we can actually open this one up a bit more all the way down to 1.2. Keep that ND on, you've got a far shallower image. It looks much more cinematic. I'm going to take that off. And as you can see, it's now overexposed. Now, we do have NDs that you can get for cameras like the DSLR. For this one, you would basically get an ND that you can screw onto the top. They're quite cheap. You can get them in different kinds. You can get a fixed ND that's going to be, for example, a 2 or a 4 or a 6. Now the grading on an ND filter, those numbers basically refer to the amount of light that they stop coming into your lens. So if you've got, say, a 2, you're not really going to use that on a bright sunny day. It's not going to stop a lot of light coming in. But if you're in a controlled environment like this, then something like a low ND number is going to be fine. Now, the best type that you can get for these lenses, particularly if you do have these L series lenses, because a lot of them have the same size filter thread, which is just this ring around there, is a variable ND. I don't have one to show you, but you can easily look them up. We're going to have links to everything in the descriptions underneath these videos. But the ND is variable, which means it can let different amounts of light in as your exposure changes. Now, if you are shooting outside, or if you're shooting near a window and using daylight as a source of light, you're going to want to change, because daylight changes all the time. So that's a really helpful thing that you can bear in mind to keeping your f-stop nice and wide, keeping a lot of light come in, keeping your image really cinematic. Okay. Now, I think we briefly touched on white balance when we were sat over there. I do want to talk a bit more about that. I'm going to use you here, Marco, as my assistant, if you don't mind. Okay, cool. So with the lighting in here, I've basically got everything set up for a tungsten look, which is roughly the kind of light that you're going to have from your household bulbs. So tungsten is kind of an orange light. You'll have seen it when you're at home. Just flick on the light switch, everything looks kind of orange. That's a tungsten light. It looks like this kind of light. So with these lights, we've got fixed tubes. They only allow us to have tungsten. With that one, it's dimmable. We can actually change the color quality. With this light, it's pretty much always going to be a tungsten look. It's again dimmable, but if you dim these lights, it changes the orangeness. So if you bring that light level down, it's going to look a bit more orange, and we don't really want that. So we would put this on a daylight light to make it look orange. Let's have the blue one. Thank you. Okay, so now this is called CTO. It basically means color temperature blue. CTB. It'd be great if I knew which letters were which. The other one was CTO. Now, as you can see with this, if we put it over, it's first of all, it's going to halve the amount of light coming out, but it's also going to give the light a colder look. So if we are lighting with mixed lighting sources, if you're shooting in front of a daylight source, daylight has a very cold look to it. Sunlight during high sun is this kind of blue quality. So you're going to need to cover those kinds of bulbs if you want to have a matched lighting source. And you do want that, because if you've got a mixed light and your white balance is set to a preset like tungsten, it's going to look really strange. I'll show you with this source of light. It just instantly changes the temperature there. You can see that it's more of a cream, a white look. Without that, it's really quite visibly orange. So that's how you're going to use gels, as just a really simple way of changing the color quality of your light without having to buy lights that have changeable bulbs, or without having to buy a wide range of lights. These gels are really cheap and really helpful to have in your kit bag. Now, I'm going to show you how to change your... I won't look at that yet. Okay. Thanks, Marco. Okay. Now, as I said, all of the lights that I've set up in here are set to a tungsten look. Now, we've said white balance, and I've dialed mine in manually to Kelvin, which is just basically a temperature control. So if you think, as I've said about the blue light from the sun being a cold light, you can also call tungsten light a hot light or a warm light. So Kelvin is basically a measure of temperature, and that's what we call white balance. It's a color temperature. So on these cameras, I can just highlight that there, 3600 Kelvin. It's roughly a tungsten look. You can change that by dialing. And if I dial this all the way up, for a daylight look, you can see that my image gets really, really orange. And the reason that is because the camera is expecting blue light sources to come in. It's compensating by adding this orange filter, and it's just ending up looking really weird. You can use that if you're looking for a fun sort of effect. Also with daylight, if you're shooting later in the day, the sun dips lower, the sun gets visibly orange. You've probably all seen the sun gets kind of pink in the sky. It's very romantic. So if we were shooting a romantic scene here, I might use that as an effect. But generally, you want to get your white balance so everything kind of looks the same as it does to the naked eye. So here, I would say about 3600, 3700. That's about tungsten. It's about matched with the lights in the room. Now, obviously, if you are using your own sources as a light, so for example, the lamp in here, you might find that they're not going to be exactly specifically rated for film. So these bulbs are more orange. That lamp looks more orange to my eye than these lights. So you might want to compensate for that. We wouldn't be using that as a main light source. It's just there to add some flair to the room. Do you have any questions?
No, just as a reminder, you know, next session will so next week will be completely dedicated to lighting.
Yeah.
So if you
do want to particularly know more about lights, definitely make sure you tune into the whole series, but definitely tune in next week. We're going to look really deeply into lighting and things like lighting sources, different color temperatures. Okay. So, going back to manually operating your camera. We've talked about ways that we can control light coming in, we've talked about ways we control colour of the light, we've talked about ways you can add ISO. That's something that you kind of need to bear in mind depending on the camera that you're using. Now, we did talk a bit about this. This is a DSLR. This one is your Canon 60D. It's pretty good because it's got a flip-out screen, which if you are a vlogger, is going to be helpful. You're going to be able to set it up on a tripod, be facing it, and see your image at the same time. But the only problem you'll find with these cameras is they don't have as much low light sensitivity. Partly that's because of the sensor. The sensor inside of these cameras is a bit smaller and it just doesn't have the same sort of pixel depth as you're going to get with something like this camera. But they're still great cameras, and with the right lens and the right manipulation you're still going to be able to get a really beautiful image. So on this one I've basically set your f-stop as low as it can go with this lens. It is fixed at f4, you can't get any lower than that, which is going to let more light in. I've also lowered the shutter speed to 30, which could give you a little bit of motion blur, but it should just keep more light coming in. And then that ISO I would probably take down a little bit to 640, and that's going to give you about the right exposure for skin tones. You're most frequently going to be shooting faces, people, conversations. You really want to keep your detail on your skin tones. It's the most important thing to get right, because if you're going to have a blown out face, then you can't fix that in post. It's just really difficult unless you're a bit of a color correction wizard. Okay, so shall we talk a little bit about sound?
Yes.
All right, well, I will leave that rolling and we'll go back to the bench.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I
Now,
see a lot of microphones here.
Yes, we've got a lot of different microphones and we're going to talk about a few different techniques. We're also going to talk about external recorders, which are going to be really handy if you want to get slightly higher quality of
so
sound.
for example, if you're a musician on YouTube.
I mean, any kind of application really. Live shooting, taking in a feed from a band, that kind of thing. So with these DSLRs, you do have the option to put in a microphone. You've got this little flip out bit here which is going to open up, and you've got a mic jack there. It doesn't have a headphone jack. Now that's one of the main reasons that you're going to look at external sound, because if you can't monitor your sound, you can't be sure that you're getting really good clean sound. And actually, as a cinematographer, I would say sound is more important almost than visuals. If I'm in the cinema, I'm watching a film, I can forgive a slightly out of focus shot, but if you suddenly have sound cut out, it really ruins that illusion of being in the moment.
It's more
so
disturbing.
yeah, you've probably had that experience. You hear bad sound and you're just like, oh man, that really sucks. So yeah, we're going to look at some options. Now, this one's the Rode mic. This is designed for DSLRs in particular. It's a really good option if you are on a bit of a budget. It's going to just slot in there and it will record basically everything that it gets into that field. It's what we would call omnidirectional. So it will record basically everything within a certain pole of sound. Now the only problem with that is you're going to get everything. So if you're trying to think about sound, if you're trying to prepare for your shoot, you want to know what kind of environment you're going to be shooting in. You want to know that you've got some kind of control over your sound options there. With this one, if you're not in a well-controlled environment, you are going to pick up, you know, the planes going overhead, you're going to pick up the bus that goes past the window. And when you then try and raise those levels up to get the vocals in your post, you're going to also raise up all those sounds. So it's a great option if you've got that level of control over your shooting environment. If you don't, you're probably going to want to look at some other options. So we will look at those now.
So is there something more kind of directional?
Yeah, there is. This one is a really good directional mic. It's kind of a shotgun mic, as we would call it, and it's basically designed to pick up sound from the direction that it's pointing in. Now, you might have seen this one used with a boom pole. I'm going to demonstrate that. If you take that from me, Marco.
Yep.
Awesome. Now, obviously, it's not going to be practical if you're a solo vlogger, if you've got quite a small setup to boom yourself. Yeah. But if you, so that one, I probably won't just do it, but it just slots in there basically. It's going to open up. This is a shock mount. It's going to stop it from wobbling around, getting all that noise from interference. You'll have your XLR cable running down there. And if you're going to boom, you've probably seen two different styles of doing it.
So what is the difference between, doing from
above and below? So basically, if you're above, it's good, clean sound. Most people project upwards. If you're, for example, recording an interview, people are going to sort of project their sound that way. If you can get away with having a boom from above, then that's probably slightly better quality than below. You might find if you're in a situation like this, we've got studio lighting, it can cast shadows that can be a bit unflattering. So you do have to think about that. The other option is you can boom from below. If you're going to do that, you want to aim for the diaphragm. You want to aim for where we project our voices. Basically, if you aim for the lips, you're actually going to lose some of that sound. So if you aim for the diaphragm, you're going to get a good, clear sound. But for that, you do need your mic to be pretty close to the person that you're recording. So as I said, it's not really practical if you're a solo shooter. But there are ways that you can use these mics as a solo shooter. And that is if you're using an external recorder. So we're going to look at this, if I get you to hold that for me.
Yeah.
So this is the Zoom H4n. It's an external recorder. It's really designed for professional applications where you want to have a bit more control over your sound, where you want to monitor your sound. That's really helpful. So basically, there are two. Yeah, it's got two condenser mics on the top. They're going to just get general Atmos. This actually has the ability to record stereo, metered sound, and 4-channel. So if you're on 4-channel, you've got your two mics there. You can also take two mics into the bass. I probably wouldn't use that a lot, to be honest, because it's a lot of post. Then you've got a lot of different audio tracks to sort through in order to get your edit. But if you do want to get a nice clean sound, you can monitor this. You've got a headphone slot. You can set your separate levels for your mics coming in. And if you just get something like a holder for that mic, then you're going to be able to just have a good clean sound coming in and something that you can monitor. It does also have a visual display, so when this is turned on, you're going to get bars just coming across to tell you roughly where the sound level is at. So if you are shooting just you don't really want to have headphones on for your speech, you're going to just visually check those, do a quick test of levels when you start. You should be okay. Most people aren't really going to change unless they suddenly start screaming, they're not really going to change their volume too much. So it's really important that you check those levels before you start recording, and they should be about right. I mean, you can set this to auto, but you've got the potential then for it to just pick up on a sound in the background and really amplify it, and then it's quite difficult to sort that out in the edit. So that's one option. Then you've got a slightly lower price range option here. This one, again, it's made by Zoom. It's the H1. It doesn't have an XLR input, which is like that fat 3-pin connector on the end of that Rode mic. It's got the kind of connection that's going to allow you to put this one in. So that would just go in there, into that 3.5 jack. And again, it just means that you're not having to just worry about the sound being recorded on your inbuilt camera. In sound, we have something called preamplification. So basically, your DSLR doesn't have very good preamplification. It just kind of assumes that you're going to be shooting video on it and not too much worried about sound. So it's just going to kind of go crazy, pick up sounds and boost everything up. So you've just got everything on there. With something like this, it's got much more sensitive preamplification. It's going to be directed towards the sounds you really want, and you're going to be able to monitor it. Again, you're going to be able to change the volume of your input coming in, and it does also have these two little mics on the top. They kind of work a bit like a dictaphone. You wouldn't necessarily really want to use those in every application, but if you're just shooting something like a talk at an auditorium, you just want to make sure you get everyone, there's several speakers, you could put this somewhere on the stage, leave that rolling, and you're just going to have it to sync up in post, which could be a long process, but we'll talk about that in another session. Now, the other options, as you can see we've got, are radio mics. Now, these do run a little bit expensive if you want proper proper radio mics, if you want to be able to have your separate packs and your transmitters and take feeds into different places. But if you're not too worried about cables, if you're in this kind of setup, if you're a home vlogger and you've got your camera there and you're sat there and you're not doing too much moving around, you can look at something like this. Now this is called a wired lav mic. It just means lavalier, but basically it's the same principle. You've got a tiny little mic that's very directional. You're going to clip it on and it's going to get a really nice level of sound. And this is really cheap. I think you can get these probably for about 20 quid, 20 pounds. So yeah, this is a really low-end sort of mic, but it's got really good sound. Audio-Technica is pretty good company. So you're going to clip this one on. You're going to run that wire direct either into something that has preamplification, like a separate recorder. Again, it's got a 3.5 jack, so it would go straight into that, or it's got the same jack connection as your camera, so you can also run your feed straight into that. Now, the beauty of the 60D, I think this is also on the 5D3 and the 1DC. I'm not sure about your Nikon cameras, but they do have a visual guide for your sound levels. So even if you don't have headphones, or if using headphones would sort of destroy your sort of presentation, you can have a visual guide on there. See if I can demonstrate that. I can't because there's no card in this camera. Well, there you go. But basically, when you're rolling, you're going to want to have all of your settings up there, and then as soon as you hit record, most of those will disappear, so you can actually see your image, and you'll just have monitor bars come up so you can actually see the levels. And what you want to avoid is anything too quiet, because again, these cameras record everything. If you're going to boost that to get your voice level up, you're boosting everything else. But if you take it too high, you're going to see the lines go red, which means it's peaking, which means that you're getting that strange sound. I don't know if you've ever experienced over cranked noise. You get that kind of weird breakup. It sounds a bit like gain, where everything just kind of splits, and it's totally unusable. It's really difficult to fix that in post. There are ways that you can do it, but the best thing to do is really record good quality audio to begin with. So lastly, I think we should talk about different kinds of cameras that you can use. That, you know, some of these settings apply, some of them don't. Now, I did bring out a GoPro because I think they're a really good option for if you are a vlogger, if you just want to shoot something on the go. You can literally, it's in the name, GoPro. This camera, it doesn't have as much control over things like ISO, exposure. They're designed for sports originally, so they're going to take care of that yourself. If you do use these cameras, you really want to make sure you're shooting in a really well lit environment, because cameras that don't offer you those manual controls aren't going to give you such a cinematic image, and they will need to bump up their gain, which, as we know, adds noise in the picture. So if you're shooting in a well lit environment, if you're outside, if you've got, you know, a pole cam and you want to have it just far away pointing at you, then these are really, really great for the price. There's a new one out now, the GoPro 4, which starts at £99, which is really good actually, pretty affordable. Although you can't change a lot of the settings on it, it gives you a really nice image, still full HD.
How about the sound?
Now, sound on the GoPro, again, it has a built-in sound, built-in microphone. It's not amazing, and there's not really a way that you can get better sound into it because it's such a tight, compact camera. So if you are shooting on that, it's really going to be more for like action stuff. If you're the kind of person that shoots anything that's got montage in it, these are really great cameras to have for that. You know, you can do a lot of crazy things with them. They're in their own case, so I really like that. I brought this out as, you know, sort of an example. This is on a really strong crock lid, like really difficult to open. You can stick that virtually anywhere, and you're really going to be able to get just interesting angles, interesting stuff, just better images, basically. Lastly, actually, talking about framing, I would quite like to go back to our model, if you're up for that.
Yep.
Cool. So, you've got your image framed up, you've got your ISO set at a non-noisy level, you've got your white balance correct, and you've got your aperture nice and wide to let a good amount of light in. the last thing that we're going to talk about in this session is just framing up your image. So we talked about the fact that this is the nifty 50 lens. It gives you a nice kind of portrait style mid shot. Now what that means is it's kind of a medium sized image. It's not too wide, you're not seeing everything in the background. And what I've done here is just set the model's eyes so they're about the top third of the screen. Now in framing we talk a lot about the rule of thirds, and what that essentially means is if you're filming a person, you want to maintain their eye level so it's just roughly on that top third. So if you imagine that screen had a grid on it, you're going to place that grid and the eye line directly on that top third, and it just means that there's not too much headroom. It doesn't look bizarre. It ends up looking really flattering to the person on screen, and it just gives you a really nice balanced image. If you're framing above and they're slightly low, you're going to give them this weird sort of feeling that they're kind of trapped by the camera, and then if you film below, it's going to elevate them. So you really want to keep your image nicely framed, something like that. It's perfect. Any questions about that, Marco?
Well, more a question about like, so if I actually, something like an advice for me, so you know, if I want to start on YouTube and I need like a basic equipment, what would you recommend? Like, what would be your ideal kit?
Probably something like that 60D.
Yeah.
It's a really good camera for people that want to start on YouTube because it's got the option to have that monitor flipped round so you can see what you're doing.
Especially if you're a vlogger.
Yeah, it's really, really helpful. I mean, I've got a 5D Mark III. You can't do that. So if you do want to shoot yourself, you need to have an external monitor, and then things get really expensive.
So lenses, how expensive are lenses normally?
Lenses, they start fairly reasonably. Probably the best lens that you can get for a reasonable price is, well, if you're on a Canon camera, it's going to be the Canon 50mm 1.8. You can get that for about £98, which is quite reasonable. So it's, you know, that's the low range lens. It doesn't zoom, so like I said, you don't have that option of changing your focal length, but you can do that by walking anyway. If we wanted a closer shot, we would just walk in and you've got your closer shot. So something like that, and then probably if you are going to be recording yourself, something like that Audio Technica lav mic is going to be perfect. You're going to be able to have that connected to you. It's going to run straight into your camera, and so long as you've checked your levels and you can see that you're just about hitting the mid-range, that's going to be a really good beginner's kit.
Okay, fantastic.
Anything else?
No, I think you
All
covered
right,
pretty
let's
much
go back
everything.
over here.
So did you have any more tips and advice for today, or?
Yeah, well, while we're here, let's talk about some other prime lenses.
Yeah.
So,
well, that's a big one.
this one is is an 85mm.
How's it called? Like 85.
85mm, yeah. Basically, that's what you call it.
Okay.
So the longer the numbers on the lens, as I mentioned with the zoom, it just basically means the closer you can get. So an 85, traditionally we call it a portrait lens. It's going to get like quite a tight crop. So if we put it on that camera there, we're just going to punch in, so it'll go from that mid to the close. It's a really good lens for that kind of thing. It also, because it's a prime lens, it lets a lot more light into it, so you're going to have a really nice clean image. Now we have got some other lenses here that you can use for like strange effects. So this one is a fisheye. You know, you've probably seen this one on things like skateboard videos, surf videos, rap videos, that kind of thing. It's a really wide lens. As you can see, it kind of curves over the top, and the reason that it does that is because it's like twisting the world into a spherical picture.
Wow.
So you put on a fisheye lens and everything's going to look really weird. We'll show you that now. Lens choice is basically complicated. You kind of want to start with something that really suits your main application of filming. So if you're doing something like just filming yourself in your home, something like the 50mm is going to be perfect.
Yeah.
If you've got a zoom lens, a lot of these cameras come with packages that do include a kit lens, something like a 17mm, which is really wide, to a 55. So on this one, this fisheye, as you can see, it basically gets everything in the image. It's really wide. The closer you get to somebody, the more distorted it makes things look. Because it's really wide, it has quite a flat depth depth of field. Even when you've got your aperture really wide open, you're still going to lose some depth of field because it's basically filming everything on one flat plane. It basically flattens out your image. So that's the opposite of with the 85mm. The longer your lens is, the further away you can stand to something but pull it in so the image looks close and the background is going to look really out of focus. And as we talked about earlier in the session, that's a really cinematic look, and it's something that you really want to try and be incorporating into your imagery, because it's just a really simple way to make your productions look higher value. Any questions about that?
That's fantastic. I see something else that's not related to sound.
Yeah.
But it's
this one's an LED light. So we will obviously be going more into lighting in the next session, but I can talk a little bit about this light now. In terms of keeping your aperture nice and wide and your image nice and cinematic, this is a really good way of having a light that's going to be directly on you. It just flicks on like that. As you can see, it's quite a cold light, so we would have put some CTO on that, and also some diffusion paper, which I don't think we really talked about. We'll be talking about it in the next session. What that does is just bring down the strength of that light, softens it out so it's not such a hard light. And that would be a great one to just have literally on top of your camera, just giving you a little bit of eye light. So you've got that kind of nice soft light, and then the background can fall off a little bit more. So yeah, that's one of those that we can use for that. But really, just to sort of recap what we've talked about, your essentials of cameras: aperture, which we talked about being like an eye. The more open it is, the more light you're going to get in. The more closed it is, the less shallow your image is going to be, the more flat your image is going to be, the slightly less cinematic it's going to be. Your shutter speed, again, you can close that up. Higher shutter speed, taking more pictures, going to let less light into your image, but it's also going to give your images a slightly jerky look. So you really want to avoid using high shutter speed unless you really need to control light. If you're outside and you don't have ND filters and you've got your ISO turned down and you're still finding your images overexposed, then you can use your shutter speed for that. And then your ISO, which is the final way of controlling light that's in your image. And it's basically a rating of added exposure. You can kind of think of ISO as like a computer program version of adding light. So if your image is dark and you up your ISO, what the camera is doing is introducing its own light digitally, which is why we try and keep your ISO on these cameras fairly low, because you do find that that pixelation starts to creep in. It does start to look a bit blocky, which isn't always a good image. So yeah, those are the three main things. And then white balance, which we recapped. Now, on a lot of these cameras, you're going to have, if you don't have the ability to dial in your white balance in the Kelvin rating that we discussed, you're going to have the option to just select a white balance from symbols. So on this one, it's set to AWB, which obviously means auto white balance. You can dial that across, and it's going to go to daylight, implied by the sun. So that's going to be that kind of about 5600 Kelvin, and then you can just go across until you find one that really works. So tungsten probably is going to be about right for this. Fluorescent light, that's about 4300 Kelvin. Flash, custom. Now custom is quite helpful if you have somebody helping you to white balance. So if I was going to get you to help me with that, Marco, if you just show me this white piece of paper, what you would do is you would take a shot, so make sure you're just seeing the white. You take a still, and then if you wanted to set your white balance to custom, you would go into your menu settings in here, and then you would dial it down until you reach custom white balance. And when you select this, it's going to let you choose that image that you just took of the white, and the camera's going to basically analyze that color and think, okay, this is what I think the white balance should be, which is really handy if you aren't quite sure by eye what it's going to be, or if it's going to change a lot, or if you just don't want to use one of your inbuilt settings. Now on this camera you actually can dial in Kelvin, which is really helpful, but I know some of them don't allow that. So it's good to know what these symbols mean: daylight, shade, cloudy, tungsten. It's just going to stop your image being too orange, it's going to stop it being too blue, and it's just basically going to make sure that you've got an image that sort of matches across the spectrum of your video. Do you have any questions about white balance, Marco?
No, it's pretty much it's pretty much like benchmarking.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really helpful way of looking at it. Basically, when you go to shoot something, it's all about just making sure that the fundamentals are in place. So for this session, you know, we've looked at the fundamentals of making sure your image quality is high, preventing too much pixelation or noise coming in, keeping that depth of field at a cinematic level, and also getting the best sound. I really can't stress enough how important sound is, because it really is something that where color temperature you can fix in the edit. If you know a little bit about grading, you can just change that slightly if you've made a few errors there. Sound is really difficult to change in post. If you've got a good sound to begin with, then you're just giving yourself the basis to create really good videos every time. So that's just a really helpful thing to bear in mind. And like I said, these mics are pretty good for most applications. You're going to be able to take them straight into your camera. As I said, if you're shooting on something like a GoPro, it's not going to be so helpful. But if you've got something like a Handycam, JVC, Sony, anything like that, you're probably going to find that it's got an inbuilt mic. So with those, great. Monitor that sound, wear headphones, check your levels, check them before you begin recording, try and speak at the volume you're going to be in, try and control your sound levels. If you're shooting outside, just try and find somewhere that's a little bit covered. So if you're in a park, for example, there's going to be noise, there's going to be, you know, traffic sounds, plane sounds, but if you can get a little bit of coverage, a bit of shade, you're going to be able to stop some of that sound coming into your mic, which is really helpful if you don't have the ability to have, you know, a full setup, somebody with a boom pole, radio mics, the whole lot. It's, you know, it's just helpful to find the best situation for you to get the best application out of the tools that you already have, because you've probably already got a great starter kit to get going. And that's the most important thing that I would probably suggest. Again, if you're also outside and you manage to find some shade, you're going to be able to open up your f-stop, which is going to give you that shallow depth of field, which, you know, I mentioned a few times is going to keep your image nice and cinematic. So that's, you know, fundamentals to shooting outside is looking for those opportunities where you can just get the best out of your equipment.
Super quick question on sound. So, because you know there are so many musicians and singers out on YouTube, right? Even singing cover songs, etc. So, how would you set the room where you're actually recording yourself singing or playing an instrument? Like, would you have any specific panel along, you know, on the walls, or what kind of microphones?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of depends on the kind of level that you're at. You know, if you can dampen the sounds a bit, you might want to just, you know, really basic things to do, like hang towels up on the walls, because you do find that if you are a musician, the walls in a building can be hollow, and it can just give everything that slightly damp sound. If you just sort of dampen that out, put towels up, things like that. But really, it depends on the kind of microphones you use. It's difficult to suggest, you know, one setup for everyone, because musicians, it obviously varies. You know, if you're just a solo musician, you've got an acoustic guitar, something like that would be really good. Yeah, take that into something like this. You've got two mics, maybe one on your guitar, one on the vocals. Right. One into each channel on the Zoom H4n, you're going to be able to fully record that sound and fully monitor it the whole time. You're going to get the best application out of your pre-existing device there. So I would probably suggest something like that. I probably wouldn't suggest going just with the internal mics on the DSLR, because as I said, they do tend to just pick up everything. So if you're in a busy house and, you know, you find that quiet moment, but you've got people running around downstairs, you're going to pick up everything on these. So it's just going to slightly detract from the performance. Anything else?
I think we covered a lot of ground today.
Yeah, I think so. Anyway. Yeah, I mean, just to, you know, recap just a last time, basically keep watching every session. We're going to go over, next session is going to be much more involved in lighting. So I have touched on a little bit here. We talked a little bit about color temperature, but we're going to talk more about things that you can do if you don't have this kind of studio lighting setup, ways that you can vary your image so that you can get things like color effects with your white balance, colder lights, hotter lights, anything that's going to give you that kind of control over your image that you're really looking to take your productions to the next level. It's going to be in the next session. But for this one, yeah, just keep in mind things like controlling as much light as you can, not having a high ISO, not letting too much digital noise come into your image, making sure you've got that nice depth of field if that's what you're looking for. and you should be good. I mean, one thing that you might want to bear in mind is if you are shooting a group, you might need to have a little bit more depth of field. Depth is really great if you want that solo look. If you're going to be sat down like us and you just want to have a nice defocused background, then yeah, you want to have a pretty shallow depth of field. But if you've got a group and people are going to be moving around and talking a lot, you will probably need to give yourself a little bit more depth, because otherwise people are going to be going in and out of focus the more you move.
Right.
And you just need to play around with that. So this, you know, these lenses that open up to f4, that's probably about right for a group. But if you've got something like that 50mm that opens up all the way to 1.2, that's really pin sharpness there. You're going to move just slightly back and forth and you're going to lose that. And on these HD cameras, sharpness is really important. So you do want to make sure you're punching into that zoom, checking that everything's sharp before you hit record, especially if you're the person being filmed, because you're not going to be there to change it. So things like that are helpful. I mean, on a film set, you have a focus puller and they'll measure out the distance between the camera and where you're sat, and you'll put marks down so people don't lose that focus. And it's something that you could do in your own videos. If you know that you're going to be in one setup, know where your chair is and just test different focal lengths. Try different shallowness. Pick one that's going to work for you and just don't move around too much. And so long as everything's in focus and you're going to have that nice sort of Hollywood look with a nice shallow focus background, it's going to be good.
Wow, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michelle. So like today we covered a lot of super interesting basics, but you know, you covered pretty much everything on camera and sound. So I think for today, that's pretty much it. We hope you guys enjoyed this masterclass, and please come back next week, again on Thursday. If you're watching from GMT time zone, please come back at 6 p.m. If you're watching from Central European zone, come back at 7 p.m. And if you have any questions, any outstanding questions, you can still post your comment below, and Michelle will get back to you and answer those questions in the comment box. So thanks again, and see you next week for another masterclasses on lighting. Bye guys.
Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.